asked Leslie to give more of her life story. We thought it was going to be the second half, but it turns out, no, Leslie said, this is just another portion. Who knows, maybe we'll get a third portion coming up.
Next year.
Before I forget, I do want to acknowledge that we have lots of Leslie's family here, so I think it'd be fun to know who they are. I think they're sitting mostly in the front row. And so do you want to introduce yourself? I think it would be nice.
Yes.
We're lucky to have you. Okay.
I'm Bree. I'm Leslie's granddaughter.
Hi, Bree.
I'm Ellie. I'm Leslie's daughter. My mom's daughter.
Without a microphone.
You turn on, turn on, you can see her.
I'm Bree. I'm Leslie's granddaughter.
I'm Elle. Leslie's daughter.
I am.
My name's Glenn. I'm Ellie's husband and Leslie's son-in-law.
Hi, I'm Laurel. I'm Leslie's great-granddaughter. My mom is Bree. And I'm her other great-granddaughter. Oh, yeah.
So you're going to get later.
My great-grandchildren are about this tall.
She has some other ones that's all too.
I'm Liz. I'm Leslie's adopted daughter.
And I'm Tom. I'm the adopted son-in-law.
Wonderful. Thank you all, wonderful. Do we have other guests here tonight? Right. Yeah. All right. When I asked Leslie if she wanted someone she knew quite well to introduce her, she said, no, you just go ahead and say anything you want to about me. So, I'll tell you my personal experience. I've just gotten to know Leslie a little more and more, and I love her better each time I know her. Wit and wisdom are two things, I think. Leslie has such a sense of humor, but she also has some real wisdom, and we've shared a bit deeply. I really appreciate Leslie. I did look up in her Who's Who, and I suggest you look up in the Who's Who too, because I'd forgotten, and there's some really sweet things in here, Leslie says. I'm just going to read a tiny bit of it. When I was 4, my father bought a ranch in Utah and moved his family by covered wagon to a land without running water and electricity. She was born in 1915, so 4 years later. Leslie did go to college, and she got a degree in library science, education too. She worked quite a bit in libraries, technical and other libraries, and teaching a lot. But this is the crux. She says, my family has always been the anchor of my life. First, my parents and siblings, then my own family, my daughters, Elaine and Ellie, who now live in Santa Rosa with their own families. And I have, probably this is incorrect, I have 3 granddaughters, 12 great-grandchildren. You may have more by now.
No.
Sure. But I still, okay?
You're okay.
Okay, that's okay, all right. And we have the beloved adopted daughter, too, who comes over and plays cards or something, I think. Lovely. All right, let's see what else I wanted to say. I think I won't say much more. Just that Leslie has been working really hard on this. We asked her to do this, I think it was last June, she might, and she was willing, but she said, I need time. So when August came, I thought about it, and well, I need a little more time. And also, I don't want to disrupt it all or take away from Jean Hauser, who's going to be 100. So let Jean have the glory, and Jean's right over here with us. And but she would do it in September, on September 18th. So here we are, and we're just thrilled that you offered to do this for us. Tell us another portion of your life.
Right.
Leslie, cheers.
Thank you. Sure. Good evening, my friends.
Good evening.
My name is Leslie Bond. This is an house. Most of you know me as I have been here more than 3 years. George Sackman wrote a lovely article about me the first year. Later, I told you the story about my early childhood growing up in the mountains, the last frontier in northeastern Utah. That's where Dad had purchased a ranch. Hard work for him and Mama, but for me, a place of wonder and magic, and a sky full of birds and stars at night, and fences lined with meadowlarks who sang every morning the most joyous songs of praise and promise, and have always remained in my life. So I brought him here with me to tell you that the meadowlark still sings and has always been with me, no matter how bleak and how difficult my life became. I want you to listen. My name, my mama said, listen carefully. Hear the song of the meadowlark. He's singing to you. So I listened to the meadowlark sitting on our fence, yellow chest puffed out toward the heavens. The song high and bright, climbing upward in joy, trilling in the golden sunlight. Mama, what is the meadowlark singing? I asked, as the music rose even higher, up and up, again and again, Joey found. Leslie is a pretty little girl. Don't you hear it? Listen, listen. Then I heard the words clearly. Leslie is a pretty little girl, and it is a beautiful day. I've carried these words each morning through the years, a song always joyous, always praising. Leslie is a pretty little girl, and it is a beautiful day. And it is a beautiful day. Now to my story. When Dad was shot in the leg by a neighbor, he sold the ranch and moved to Roosevelt. It was a hot town in the valley below, where he bought a bottling works and ice cream factory. Here we all worked very, very hard together and prospered. Those were the McKinley and Calvin Coolidge days. Silent Cal, as we called him, and learned the word taciturn. During the 20s, the nation prospered. It was the roaring 20s, a happy time. Some of you may remember a little bit about this. The Jazz Age. People moving to cities, shorter skirts, women cutting their long hair, unlawful gambling, crime, big dramatic social and political changes, and unprecedented prosperity. Just everything turned good in those years. Dad often used parables to explain his view. I'd rather be a big frog in a small pond than a small frog in a large pond, he often said. And then he would make up a story about it. As I look back on that time, I believe both Dad and Mom were big frogs in Roosevelt. They were leaders in civic activities, in the church, in school PTA, in politics, leaders in the Democratic Party, and in social activities. They were highly respected business leaders, always generous and compassionate, and to those who needed help, he was compassionate to them. Money was easy to borrow, and giving credit was a way of life. Dad sold and bought on credit. This was a period of great prosperity. Good times for us, for our city, for the world. That was the glorious Roaring 20s. And then came the stock market crash of 1929, the beginning of the Great Depression, which lasted until 1939 and longer for many. 10 long years. President Hoover, who followed Coolidge, didn't know what to do about it. Nothing in our laws was written to help us. Men were ashamed to ask for help. They had always taken care of their families, and now they couldn't. They lost their savings in the banks. They lost their jobs. They lost their homes and cars. And worse than that, they lost their pride and then their hope. By 1932, 25 to 32% of the breadwinners were out of work. You probably remember this. A lot of you remember, I'm sure. 30% of the breadwinners. And the Great Depression was worldwide. It started here in the United States, but it was worldwide. I was a freshman in high school at this time, so I still have sharp memories of what had happened. The Depression changed family life drastically. It changed ours. October 29, 1929 was called Black Tuesday, and aptly so. Dad was forced into bankruptcy and lost everything but his optimism. Don't worry, he said. I have lots of friends in Salt Lake City who will give me work or help me find work. He promised us at the end of one of our prayer sessions. There were no government agencies to lend a hand, not on local, state, or national level. And there were too many needing help. That left churches and extended families who helped as much as they could and as long as they could. But charity was not the answer. That was too humiliating. To be a man, you needed to feel you could take care of your family. That was a shared feeling at that time. They were ashamed to be in the situation they were in. So we moved to Salt Lake to start over again. As a family, we started each morning in prayer and ended each day in prayer. In between times, Mama told Dad's fortune with coffee grounds. In a way, she had the hardest job, trying to keep our spirits up. We all searched for jobs, some way to make money. My brother Marvin tried to sell vacuums to make money and other items door to door. My sister Elaine was the only one in our family to get a job, but hers was without pay. She worked at a fancy drive-in where the girls wore roller skates to get orders and deliver the food. And all they got for this hard work was the tips. And they had to share the tips with all the girls. But Elaine worked very hard, and she had $1 million smile. She was quite a charmer. And so she made enough to help feed us. Now we're down to the place we just get food to eat. By the end of July, Dad was quite discouraged, as we all were. We lived close to Liberty Park, where family celebrations were held. A good place, Dad predicted, to sell balloons. So with some of his last money, he invested in the necessary equipment, and taking his sales force with him, his children, he drove to the park. One of the hottest days of the year, a scorcher. still with high hopes. But where were the people? Where was the celebration? Dad sent us out in 4 directions with a brave clutch of bright balloons, but no eager children anywhere begging to have one. They were at home safely, out of the sun. Soon we had to abandon our sales plan, our first sunstroke. I'll always remember our dad standing resolutely in his corner, tall, proud, handsome, determined, finally raising the signal to go home. Not one balloon had been sold. Dad still had some magic. He knew he couldn't give up. Later, he confessed he even considered taking a fishing trip and accidentally drowning so his family could collect his insurance. He had carried a $50,000 policy for a number of years. But when the insurance came due, he couldn't pay it. Another bad idea. But while he was making the rounds of all the people he knew in Salt Lake City for a lead on a job, he heard about a mineral spring in Soda Springs, Idaho. The water from the springs was a natural mineral water with an excess of free carbonic acid gas. A bottling plant had been built near the springs, and this water was bottled as it flowed from the spring. The water received first award at the World's Fair in Paris, France, for its purity. 99 and 90% pure. At that time, the water was shipped all over the country, and about 15 railroad cars per month. The bottling plant had stopped operating years ago, but the building still stood and was for sale. Dad saw this as a chance to get started in a successful bottling business. He convinced the owner of a state company, an attorney, and an unemployed top salesman to furnish the money to lease with the option to buy the mineral springs, the freshwater springs, and the vast lands that they owned. They would incorporate as Idaho Mineral Water Company. Dad had no money of his own to put in the enterprise. His contribution would be his new Oldsmobile and his know-how and his labor and that of his families. Dad had no money left to even wiggle in, so he borrowed money from a sister. I found a letter he had written to her August 31st, 1931, in which he had thanked her. Quote, "I have plans and hopes at this time. I think I will be able to start over again in Soda Springs, Idaho. If I do, you will have to take your hats off to me, for as conditions are, it will take a lot of nerve to even try, as I haven't a dollar to start on, not even cash enough to pay house rent." When our parents told us their plans, we were ready. My brother Marvin would drive a truck packed with furniture. Ivan and I would ride with him. Mom and Dad and our little brother would come in the Oldsmobile. But they couldn't leave until Dad got money from his partners. They sent us ahead, feeling certain they would be following soon. We were to unload the furniture and then Marvin was to return to load the truck with the rest of our household items and personal possessions and drive back the next day at the same time that Dad and Mama did. As we drove north toward Idaho, I silently mouthed a little prayer, Dad's prayer, and then I closed the book. A new chapter had already begun, and I was ready for the adventure. Dad had already rented a house for us, the nicest one he could find, as he wanted to make a good impression on the people in Soda Springs. So that was where we headed, knowing that we would be alone for one night only. Aunt Nina had given us a nice loaf of freshly baked bread and some homemade cottage cheese for our breakfast and lunch. We were 14 and 15 years old and would be all right for one day. Not to worry. Big adventure. Our brother made the trip a fun time. He had been there once before with Dad and could tell us a few things about this part of Idaho, that it was Wild West, an Indian country. When we got to the house, we were quite impressed. The outside was well maintained. It had a living room, a dining room, kitchen, 3 bedrooms, a bath, and full basement. The heat for the house came out of the basement furnace in only one place. That was in the hallway that connected the bedroom and bath to the rest of the rooms. The middle grill work above the furnace would get red hot whenever the furnace was going, making it dangerous to step on. We quickly helped Marvin unload the truck, putting most of the things in the dining room so we could start clearing the other part of the house. So we could start cleaning the other part of the house. But after Marvin left, we discovered the water was not turned on, the electricity was not turned on, and we couldn't find the cleaning supplies. We had no money, and we were thirsty and hungry. We took a walk to see where we lived. This part of Soda Springs was very plain, almost treeless. Not too many houses either. In one direction was the small western town, and in the other direction, the high school. Evening was shutting down fast now. Shadows filled the rooms inside. We hurriedly made our beds, then located our bread and cheese. We were so hungry we could have eaten it all in one meal, but we saved half of it for tomorrow. We loosely rewrapped it in the paper Aunt Nina had used and placed it on a packing box. As we were slipping off to sleep, we heard a chug, 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 growing louder, like some monsters coming through our house. We clung to each other in fear, too terrified to even cry out. And then the long, wailing, sliding off in the distance. That sounds like a train, I said, even though I had never heard one at night. The room was now coal black, but the house sounds were sharp and clear. Something else, like a movement in the mixture. But exhaustion finally captured us, and we slept until bright sun forced our eyes open. There we were, alone, our clothes all wrinkled, our breakfast all eaten, every crumb of it by mice, part of the mysterious house. All we could do was laugh, which we did, as we recounted our terror of the night and planned the story that we would tell the family when they arrived. We stayed close to the house that second day, still lighthearted, but Ibadel was the worrier of the family, and when she decided they should have arrived, she began looking up and down the streets and praying out loud, and I kept telling her ridiculous stories about why the delay to make her laugh. Before we went to bed that night, we knelt prayer, like Dad's prayer, a conversation with God, imploring Him to watch over our family and keep us all safe. We worried through the third day on empty stomachs. On the morning of the fourth day, I said teasingly to Ivadel, "Well, sis, put on your best dress, comb your golden tresses, and let's go out for breakfast." After we got to the little grocery store, she refused to go in with me. It was a mom's and pop's kind of store. The clerk was probably the owner. When I explained the situation and said Dad would pay him when he arrived, he was very gracious and helped me pick out the items I wanted, which included cleaning supplies and mouse traps. We were there a week before the family arrived with their own sad story to tell. No money to move on, not even enough to send a telegram to us. All they could do was pray for our safety while we were praying for theirs. I was praised for my resourcefulness by my parents, and a special blessing for Elaine, who had remained in Salt Lake. And then we knelt, and Dad thanked God for our gift of being reunited. The next day, Dad and Marvin took us on a tour of Soda Springs and the property we were now leasing. It was like going to the movies or reading some science fiction story or mystery of long ago. We drove out of town toward the hills, looking and looking, but there were few houses. Finally, looming ahead was a huge brick building with a wooden ramp driveway to a porch-like platform where car loads above water had been loaded. It seemed like a city block inside the building. Living inside the attic was thousands and thousands of bats. Dad explained, and they feed on the insects who live in that swamp that is fed by the spring. Just a short distance away, we saw it, a spring of bubbling water. It had been boxed in and boards over the top to make it safe. As we looked out toward the spring, we could see big whooping cranes flying in. It was a fabulous view that captured my heart and imagination. "Now look to your right," Dad said. It was probably where the Bobblers lived and been lovely when it was new. But not now anymore, I thought, as I looked at the old frame house, 2 stories high, with an open porch that circled half the house. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms, while downstairs was a large kitchen, a spacious living room, and 3 bedrooms added on front, Dad said. The 2 front bedrooms had been used for sheltering livestock and were now unsafe to even go in. Across the street was another vacant house, very nice from the outside. Surrounding us was nature, beautiful wild nature, with hills to be climbed and forests explored. Dad had to return to Salt Lake City on business and to buy a kitchen range. While he was gone, the schools opened. This was the shocking news we told him on his return. High school is not free, nor are the books. But he only had to pay for Ivadel and myself, as Elaine was still in Salt Lake, and Marvin was needed to help Dad get the plant ready and begin production. There were fewer than 100 students in all 4 grades, and not many teachers, and small class sizes. After every class, there was a study period, so you didn't have to take schoolwork home. If you completed your daily assignment correctly and turned them in on time, you didn't have to take the test.
Great idea.
That first year in Soda Springs was an unpleasant one. The rented house was poorly designed and cold and drafty, and we often went to the furnace room and hugged against the heat there. Elaine had rejoined us, and Marvin often stayed alone at the plant to keep things from freezing up. If Marvin had the truck, Elaine and Dad had to walk to the plant, where they also worked all day. Mama had the difficult job of caring for the little boys and preparing food for the family. Every meal seemed like a miracle to me, all carefully doled out, no food wasted. All during this time, you could count on two things in our home: Dad's family prayers and Mama telling Dad's fortune with coffee grounds. Sometimes twice a day. We were already tightly bonded and lived and felt and acted as one. And we kept getting poorer and poorer. It became impossible to get enough money from the INA Corporation to even exist much longer. On March 1932, Dad wrote to his partners these chilling words. And these are sentences taken from the letter, not as it was written. This is my last stamp. I have gone as far as I can without cash. My girls have $38.85 coming to them for labeling since April 1st, and Marvin has never received a dime for the 7.5 months' work. I have been thinking, if you men came up and we could go over our business with Dr. Cackley, we might be able to get help from him. If I could get the house close to the plant in condition to live in, I could save $1.25 a day. But we can't move it until I pay our rent here. Dad's letter only partially told of the hardship we endured. There were terrible blizzards. When the winds blew, the inside of the rented house was like standing outdoors. Marvin, Elaine, and Dad were the ones who had to do the walking in. It was 7 miles. And now it would be the school children, but that problem had to stand in line behind all the more pressing ones of moving, paying bills, and just getting food on the table. In some ways, the plant house was superior to the one in town, better insulated and better built, and with the windows big enough to enjoy the marvelous view. I especially remember the kitchen floor made of unfinished wood and uncovered except for the ground-in garbage and dirt. We took turns scrubbing it, and we all got slivers in our hands from the old wood. Mama soon had the house looking homelike and cozy. Although there was evidence that there had been running water and a kitchen sink, it had been removed. We were also back to an all-outdoor privy. There were 3 bedrooms, one downstairs where the boys slept, and 2 upstairs, one for Mama and Dad, and one for the 3 girls. The stairway was on the outside of the house with a small landing. The door opened out, no screen door to keep out wildlife. The first night we stepped upstairs, we were awakened by padded footsteps coming up, 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 and a tail whacking on the stairs. Whack, whack. And there they were in our room. They were 3 or 4 times bigger than a mouse and with big round eyes of curiosity. They didn't retreat from our screaming. We actually had to drive them out with a broom and with whatever we could get to hit them with. Mama identified them as pack rats. Another creature we had to learn to live with, but they only visit us in early spring and in the fall. And then you could see all 5 of us doing the rat dance, armed with long sticks and brooms. We couldn't afford screen doors, of course, and we needed the doors open for cool night air. It took us a long time to get used to drinking the water from the springs near us. At first, food and coffee didn't taste right. We would melt snow to wash our hair and do our washing, or haul it in from other springs with water, not so hard. But even in a hot summer, we could find shaded areas where the snow had not melted. Mosquitoes, horseflies, deer flies, and sheep ticks were permanent occupants, coming out in full force in the spring. They were ready for us when we arrived, huge and vicious. Their bites left large welts that hurt and itched for hours. Mama bought a bottle of citronella and rubbed on herself and the family, but it didn't help much. Poor Mama. The moms liked her the best. In the early evening, hundreds of bats, or maybe thousands, flew out from under the eaves of the plant in the 2 front bedrooms to further darken the fading light. We watched them until the insects drove us to seek shelter. Deer and other wild animals sometimes came down the mountains and into our yard. That fall, a family of 5 children moved into the vacant house across the street. They were from some other places in Idaho and knew its special climate and holidays. Now there were 3 families that lived near the watering plant. Mr. Thatcher had extra guns and many pairs of skis and snowshoes, which he shared with us. When hunting season was declared, he and Marvin went deer hunting. And they were both successful. From then on, we had meat on our table, as did many others. Marvin would kill a deer whenever it was needed. He and Dad would dress and cure it. Sometimes my brother would bring home pine hens that tasted like pine nuts and were quite a treat when cooked like chicken. While it was illegal to hunt except in hunting season, during the Depression, this law was not enforced. Otherwise, many families would have starved to death. Excuse me. In the fall of 1932, Elaine decided to go back to school. That meant tuition for $3 plus the cost of books. Dad made a special trip to talk to the principal, Mr. Magnus, about the problem. Since there were 3 families of children coming from the bottling plant area, the school was responsible for their transportation. You'll have to excuse me while I do a cough drop.
There's a cough drop there,
I can get one.
back of the easel. Great.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you, Jody.
Yes.
What happened to me that I had this bad throat? Wasn't swallowing pills.
You're just doing fine.
I got one pill down my throat, like it was heading toward the windpipe,
She's got a rapt audience.
and then it broke. In my effort to get it out, which I couldn't do, it broke in my throat. And for a while I thought I'd already seen my maker. This is kind of interesting how we went to school that year, because it was one of the worst years that I know I'd ever had in that part of the country. Since there were 3 families of children coming from the Balding Plant area, the school was responsible for their transportation. It was agreed that the school board would pay Dad for the use of his truck as a school bus until the roads became impassable. Elaine would be the bus driver. Then Mr. Thatcher would furnish a sled as a school bus during the winter, and Mr. Albrecht furnished a wagon during the spring. Mr. Thatcher's sled was like a covered wagon. He had a wood-burning stove to help keep the children warm, and warm quilts to wrap around their legs. Sometimes the chill factor would drop to 50 or 60 degrees.
Wow.
That was the same fall that Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected. As a family, we all perked up. On the night of the election, we sat by the radio and listened to the returns with such joy and hope. It was the positive voice we had been waiting for. We never missed a fireside chat. Roosevelt was our hero. Then came the endless snow and the blizzards, tore the roofs from barns, piled up snow against doors and fences, and then froze it solid. That is what happened to our house. We had to dig tons to get out to the spring or over the plant. During one of the worst blizzards, I became violently ill, and beyond Mama's doctoring, who feared I had scarlet fever and required Dr. Cackley's help. It was determined later that I had gotten it from Elaine, who had such a light case that she thought she had a sore throat. She hadn't even stayed home from school, and he exposed all the students. But no one came down except Marvin. I remember how grateful we were that Dr. Cackley came out to doctors. He drove his car as far as he could on the road, and then he parked and walked the rest of the way. He warranted myself and Marvin and Mama for several weeks upstairs. No one was allowed in the rooms. What Mama requested was left on the stair landing. I remember how sick I was, even hallucinating, mostly about visits from Jesus Christ. It was reported later that 1931 and 32 were weather-wise the 2 most severe years ever reported from that area. And also that there had been an epidemic of scarlet fever that Dr. Cackley had treated and kept from spreading, with special mention of 2 children he treated, who lived miles out of town and beyond passable roads, where he had to walk to treat them and bring them medicine. No one was allowed to go to town while we were sick, and Dr. Cackley personally brought out the medicine he had ordered to give us. That's how dangerous the roads were, and how devoted the doctor was. It took many weeks before we were able to return to school. By March 1933, Dad knew he couldn't make a living at the Idaho bottling plant. President Roosevelt was trying to get men back to work and was opening up some jobs for those qualified. One such opportunity was right there in Soda Springs, which he applied for. Although he didn't get the position, he determined he would have a better chance in Utah, where he had more contacts. He had always worked very hard in the Democratic Party. Elaine brought sunshine to the school. She soon knew everyone, was lead in the school play, and gave the speech for the graduation. Dr. Cackley once more showed his friendship by hiring Elaine as a nurse's aide. But Dad no longer had a car, so it was necessary for Elaine to rent a room in town. When school was out, Dad moved the family back to Salt Lake City in a duplex close to West High School and a good grade school for Everett and Galen. Marvin had rejoined us, but Elaine had fallen in love and planned to remain in Soda Springs. I could feel the tight family cords loosening. That was hard. I hadn't even met him, though everyone in the family had, and the reports had not been glowing. After Christmas, Dad began to think about moving back to Elsinore, where he and Mama began life together. She cried when he first told her his plans. They could see no other way, but they did see positive indications for returning. He still had family living there, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. He also had 2 sisters who had moved to Upaco. One left a lovely home about 25 years ago and had been renting it, but no longer getting paid. If they could evict the occupants, Dad and Mama could live there free, my aunt said. The other sister and husband had a store that had been vacant for many years. They welcomed Dad to use it until they could find a buyer. The store was in good shape, had a nice marble fountain and other equipment, as well as ample room where bottling machines could be used. It took several months to get ready for the move. Since this was my senior year, my parents decided to leave Iredell and me in Salt Lake so I could graduate from the high school there. Otherwise, I'd been in a different high school every year. Our Uncle Hans and Aunt Marva lived in an old, run-down hotel named the White House, where they could cook in their room. My uncle was called the Watkins man because he sold spices for a living, but he was really a professional gambler. Dad rented a room for us next to theirs. They would share their bathroom, electric hot plate, toaster, and so on. Uncle Hans did most of the cooking. Delicious soups is a vivid memory. Aunt Marva was lucky if she had a job she liked, though it didn't pay much. We missed the family and kept in close touch by letter almost daily. Also with Elaine, who had remained in Soda Springs and since gotten married. Dad and Marvin witnessed the ceremony when they went back to Idaho to gather up all the rest of their possessions. In the first part of May, Vidal and I were standing in our room when we got a surprise visit from Elaine. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and then we fell in each other's arms. It was with shock and anger that we heard her story about all the lumps and bruises on her body and head. She had hitchhiked from Soda Springs after her father-in-law beat her up. Shortly after she was married, her husband Wells, who was out of work, had persuaded her to move in with his parents and pay them the rent. Wells had gone out of the area to look for work, and while he was absent, Elaine had gone out with some of their mutual friends. When she came home, Wells' father demanded to know where she had been. She politely told him where she had been was her business. This answer enraged him, and he took his rage out on her. At West High at that time, in order to graduate, you had to take a comprehensive test that would determine whether you could go to college. Since these were Depression years, caps and gowns were worn instead of beautiful new clothes because there were so many families without means. Even that cost was hard for some of us to pay. In June, we were all back in Elsinore with the family. By July, the occupants of Aunt Hannah's house had moved out. Vidal tended the store while the rest of the family they were hit by a train. His wife, Anna, was badly hurt. Nestor, his eldest son, owned a motel in Richfield and was also a truck driver. He hired me to help with the motel and to care for his mother for the rest of the summer. I was so grateful for this opportunity to earn money so maybe I could go to college. I knew my parents couldn't help me, not even $1, but what I earned would be mine. Nestor paid me a generous $1 a day and transportation to Salt Lake City. Mama found an old pair of Dad's pants and restyled them into a skirt for me. The cousin gave me a blouse she was tired of. My packing was finished in a minute. I already had a small scholarship, promise of a job to earn my tuition, and a source to find a place where I could earn my board and room. My Meadowlark was surely on my shoulder the day I went looking for a home where I could live. My first try was a winner. I found a home with Mr. Inman, a lawyer, and his wife, a home economics teacher, and their little 3-year-old daughter, Pinyan, and Mrs. Inman's sister, an older woman, a secretary. It was almost a perfect fit, except I had to sleep I always wanted to sleep alone. Never had, at that time, never slept alone. Always 2 sisters with me. And our space was limited. It was an attic room with only makeshift closets and cramped study area. But I liked the people and was treated like family. It was just a short walk from the campus. I had good news to report to the family. I was so busy learning new information and ideas that I didn't have much time to miss the family and share in the ups and downs of their lives. I spent Christmas with them, however, and we had a lovely time together. It was in the next chapter of our family journey that we all learned what poverty really meant and the pain and devastation of those without money. helpless, smashed, crushed, lost in a hole of darkness. This was the loss of our dear sister and daughter, Elaine. The enemy, poverty, and war, of course. But her story is so unbelievable and involved and tragic that it would be hard to tell in one speech. More like a book, so I'll skim. One evening in February, when I was studying in my room, Mr. Inman called me to the phone. He said very gently, "Your sister just died." I slumped in a heap, the first and only time I've ever fainted. I immediately arranged to go home and be with the family. Now, in this grim, tragic hour for us, we needed some little miracles to hold on to, and they came. Elaine's baby, a little girl, responded to the love and attention of the family. Mr. Sylvester, Dad's childhood friend, and his wife Minnie, out of town, were there. I remember Minnie bought Mama curtains for the living room, as that was where we were having the wake. She said it was to be her flowers. Most of the time was a blur of grief, but I remember vividly the evening after the funeral, when the house was full of friends, food, and the presence of Elaine. My first year at the university, I lived at the Inmans, working for board and room. It is a treasured memory. My second year at the university, Ivadel joined me. The third year, she decided to go on to business school, a wise choice that led her down a more promising future. My second year was also fraught with hunger and challenges as we lived in light housekeeping rooms. That summer, I worked in Granger, Wyoming, doing everything, renting motels, keeping books, making lunches, pumping gas, and getting another kind of education. The next year, I lived in 3 different places. Part of the time, when I worked in the university library until 10 p.m., I would walk across the city, over the railroad tracks, to where I was living. Finally, my last year, with careful planning, I was able to pay for room and board, so I'd have more time to study for my comprehensive test and take more library science classes. And then there was 1939, graduation. And then there was 1939, the end of the Great Depression, what the critics said. 10 years. 10 years, a 10-year end of the Great Depression, from 1929 to 1939. And then there was a position offered to organize and set up a new library. It was time now for a prayer of thanks. The Meadowlark kept on singing, "It is a beautiful day. It is a beautiful day." Thank you for coming.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Beautiful.
Thank you, dear. I'm sorry. There's problems with my voice.
You were spellbound. We have someone who wants to talk to Leslie. Questions? Oh, we have.
Give it to her.
Well, you want to get to her?
Lovely flowers to honor her, obviously. Leslie.
Thank all of you for coming out this cold evening to hear my trails. But I do want you to know, no matter how hard the day is, no matter what the problem is, if you wake up in the morning and hear the Meadowlark sing, the day will be better. It will be a beautiful day.
Can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Way above our expectations.
I have to tell you that all her stories are fantastic. I've heard all of them. I just want to say that I've listened to Mom's stories all my life, and they're all so incredibly interesting. And the story of her sister is extremely poignant, which she couldn't go into. Just very, very sad. So Mom's had an extremely interesting life, and I have to look back on her life. Sometimes I wish I was her sister then, because she had such a great family, togetherness, and even though they were poor, it was kind of.
We weren't always poor.
No, but it was very inspiring, and she's had a very inspiring life to all of us. Still does. Still does.
Anyone else want to have a comment? I think we're just kind of overcome. Yes, Maureen?
Leslie, I don't know how long you've been working on that, but I remember you didn't want to play Mahjong one Friday about 3 or 4 weeks ago because you were working on something. This is a thesis. Absolutely amazing. Thank you. Oh, terrific. And I forgive you for not playing bridge and Mahjong too.
Yeah, I've known Leslie for, several decades, and she's been such a wonderful person to be part of my life. I feel like knowing her has been a gift for me. She's been a good friend and an inspiration in many ways, not just in bridge, but in other ways too.
Thank you, Joe.
Is there more? Yes, she saved it up for 104, 105, etc.
There's more.
Leslie, that's such a story, and it puts up to me a comparison with my own past, a marvelous picture of poverty and just grinding and on, and I never experienced that. I remember in that period, I knew that there was poverty somewhere, but my father had a steady job, and it was fixed and certain, and we were secure, but we lived simply. But I never knew those circumstances. That's been a real revelation for me to hear that, and I thank you for it.
Thank you. That's true. My first mother-in-law and I, she lived during the Depression, but they had money, and the world was a cup of tea. She'd pick up the phone, order steak, have it delivered. When she'd go shopping, they'd parade the styles in front of her with models, and life was an entirely different thing. But imagine, a fourth are better than a fourth of the people in this country without work.
Leslie, this paper and the one that you gave us last year not only made a really wonderful speech, 2 speeches, but from my point of view, these are beautiful pieces of writing.
Yes.
And I really hope that you will be making, maybe your children or someone can help you, be sure to make copies of these 2 speeches and have, bind them up, put one in our library, make them available for your family, because you really did a polished work of writing with both of these pieces. Really beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, folks. Thank you all for coming.
George? George?